The slap landed before the room finished laughing, and for one full second, nobody moved, not even me. I felt it before I understood it. The sting blooming white across my left cheek, my tray tilting, 4 flutes of champagne going over in a bright, ridiculous arc that seemed to take longer to fall than the hand had taken to strike. Somewhere behind me, a violin kept playing. That was the detail I kept afterward. The small, absurd cruelty of it. The string quartet never stopped. My name is Marlo Hale. I was 27 years old. I had been an Omega since I was 14, and on the night everything changed, I was 3 months behind on rent and holding a serving tray on the 61st floor of Thorn Tower, wearing a black uniform, 2 sizes too big, because the laundry service always shrank the smalls. I had a business degree I couldn't use, a father 11 years dead, and a leather ledger the size of a paperback tucked in my apron pocket, its spine held together with a strip of electrical tape gone soft and gray with handling. I carried it everywhere. It had been his. I did not know yet that it would end this night, but it did. The woman who struck me, the empire I would be pulled into, the whole cracked architecture of my life, unmade and rebuilt inside of 11 hours. Delphine Ashworth Vane had rings on 4 fingers and my blood on the 5th. She was already turning back to her table, already smoothing the front of her ivory gown, as though a girl's face were a smudge she'd wiped clean off her hand. She spilled on me. She said to no one, to everyone, to the 200 donors and executives seated under the gold light of the Meridian's ballroom. I barely touched her. Subscribe to the channel, because where this story goes next, you are not going to want to miss a single minute of it. I straightened. My cheek was on fire, and my knees did not want to hold me, and I straightened anyway. Because 6 years of rooms like this one had taught me that the fastest way to become invisible again was to act like nothing had happened. I bent for the broken glass. My hands were steady. They were always steady. It was the one part of me that had never once betrayed me, not at my father's funeral, not in the unemployment office, not now. Leave it, a voice said. It did not rise. It did not need to. The room went quiet around it, the way water goes still around a stone dropped from a great height, not immediately, but completely. I looked up into the coldest, most exact face I had ever seen turned toward me on purpose. Cassia Thorne was standing. I had served her canapes 40 minutes earlier without either of us speaking a full sentence, and even then something in me had noted her the way you note weather changing, a pressure drop, a held breath in the air. The press called her the Steel Orchid, and I had always assumed that was flattery written by people who'd never stood this close to her. It wasn't flattery. It was warning label. 34 years old, sole owner of a shipping and hospitality empire her grandfather had built, and her father had nearly gutted, unmarried, unsmiling, engaged for 11 months to the woman who had just backhanded a waitress for the crime of catching 4 glasses of champagne on a tray meant for 2. She came around the table without hurrying. Alphas that powerful rarely hurry, the world hurries for them. Say that again, Cassia said, to Delphine, not to me. Tell the room what you barely touched. Cassia, Delphine's laugh had a crack running through it now, thin and bright, like a hairline fracture in expensive porcelain. It's a member of the waitstaff. Sit down. I asked you a question. The quartet finally stopped. I remember that too. The specific, ringing shape of the silence that came after, 200 people holding their champagne and their breath at the same time. I smelled her before I understood I was smelling her, which was its own kind of confession, because a well-trained Omega on suppressants isn't supposed to register an alpha's scent at 11 feet through a room full of perfume and hot canapes. But there it was, unmistakable, black pepper, and something like storm struck steel, cold and clean, and close enough now that my whole body had gone alert like a struck bell. I had smelled it once before, 7 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon when a woman in a plain gray coat had sat alone at the counter of the diner where I worked my second job, ordered coffee, corrected the check I brought her by 4 cents without looking up, and left a $50 tip and no name. I hadn't known who she was. I had thought about her, absurdly, for 3 days. "On your feet," Cassia said to me now, and it was not unkind, and it was not a request either. Alpha Command sat under the words like a current under still water. I felt my body want to obey it a full half-second before my mind caught up and agreed. I stood. My cheek throbbed. Blood was doing something warm and embarrassing at the corner of my mouth, where a ring had caught skin. "What is your name?" Cassia said. "Marlowe, Hale." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Ma'am, Marlowe Hale." She said it like she was filing it somewhere permanent. Then she turned, and the temperature of the whole ballroom seemed to drop 3 degrees with her, and she looked at Delphine Ashworth Vane the way you look at a column of figures that has finally, after months of vague unease, refused to balance. "This engagement is over," Cassia said. "I'll have my lawyers call yours in the morning. Tonight, I have somewhere else to be." She held out her hand to me. Not to help me up, I was already standing, but open, palm up, in front of 200 witnesses, in a gesture so plainly a claim that I heard the gasp ripple backward through the tables like wind through wheat. "Come with me," Cassia Thorne said, "if you want to." I looked at my shaking tray, at the wine soaking dark into pale carpet, at Delphine's face gone the color of the tablecloths, and I thought about my father's ledger in my apron pocket, and the rent, and the 6 years of being furniture in rooms exactly like this one. Then I put my hand in hers. Her skin was warm where I had expected marble. We did not speak until the elevator doors closed and sealed the ballroom's roar into a distant hush beneath us. Cassia stood a careful 2 feet away, hands loose at her sides, watching the floor numbers climb. 61, 70, 72, a private bank of numbers I hadn't known the building possessed. "You're bleeding," she said. "I've had worse Tuesdays." Something moved at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile. The rehearsal of one, "I know who you are." My stomach dropped through the elevator floor. I don't understand. 7 weeks ago. The diner on 9th. You told me I'd been overcharged 4 cents for cream I didn't order, and then you refused to take a tip larger than the bill itself until I told you it was for the coffee and not for you. She finally looked at me, and up close her eyes were a gray so pale it read almost silver, exact and unhurried, cataloging. Most people don't notice 4 cents. Most people especially don't argue with a stranger about giving them less money. "It wasn't yours to overpay for," I said. "The math was wrong." I fixed the math. "That's what I thought," Cassia said, and there was something underneath it I couldn't name yet, something that sounded almost like relief. "I've been trying to find a reason to come back to that diner for 7 weeks. I run a company with 11,000 employees, and I could not think of a single believable excuse to walk in and order coffee I don't even like." The elevator opened onto a private floor, glass and low gold light, and a silence so complete I could hear my own pulse. I stood on the threshold and did not step through yet. "Why did you do that?" I asked. "In there." "You didn't know me." Cassia considered the question like it deserved the truth and not a performance of one, "because I have spent 11 months watching that woman decide which people in a room are worth seeing," she said. "Tonight, she decided you weren't." I have built an entire company on the conviction that the people who go unseen are usually the ones worth looking at most carefully. I intend to start proving that immediately. Starting with you, Marlowe Hale, if you'll let me. Behind her, the whole skyline of the city burned gold and distant, and I realized I had never in 6 years of catering this tower been higher than the service stairwell. I stepped over the threshold. That was the first night I slept, badly, gratefully, in a guest suite with sheets that cost more than my monthly rent, inside Thorn Tower. It would not be the last. I woke to a text from Odette that read, "Only are you dead or engaged? Pick one. I need details by 9. And to the smell of coffee I hadn't made drifting under a door that hadn't existed in any apartment I'd ever lived in. The suite Cassia's staff had given me had its own bathroom with towels folded into shapes I was afraid to disturb, a walk-in closet holding 3 outfits in exactly my size that I had absolutely not provided measurements for, and a window that looked out over a city I had spent 6 years serving from the wrong side of its glass. I stood in it for a long time in yesterday's borrowed robe, feeling like a woman who had wandered on stage in the middle of someone else's play and been handed the lead role by mistake. A woman I didn't recognize was waiting in the hallway when I finally worked up the nerve to leave the room. Early 50s, silver-cropped hair, a security earpiece, and an expression that suggested she had personally vetted every threat this building had ever faced, and found me the strangest one yet. "Priya Nandi," she said. "Chief of Staff. Miss, Thorn is in a call until 10. She asked me to see you fed and to tell you that nothing that happened last night obligates you to anything today. You can leave whenever you want. Car, driver, no questions." Another pause. In 11 years, I have never once seen her stand up in the middle of a donor gala. I've seen her end board members' careers over breakfast without raising her voice. I have never seen her come around a table for anyone. Another pause. "I'm not telling you to stay. I'm telling you what you walked into." "I don't know what I walked into," I admitted. "Neither does she," Priya said. "That's what worries me." Breakfast was in a kitchen the size of my entire old apartment, and it was Cassia herself who set it in front of me. Not staff, her sleeves rolled, moving through the space like she'd learned it recently and on purpose rather than been born to it. Coffee, toast, a soft boiled egg cut precisely in half. "I don't actually cook," she said, catching my look. "I can produce exactly 4 things without supervision. This is the least embarrassing of them." "It's good," I said, and meant it, and watched something in her shoulders ease half an inch, like she'd been braced for a verdict. We ate mostly in silence, the kind that didn't demand filling. It was Cassia who broke it. "I looked into you last night," she said. Before I could stop myself, I set my fork down carefully. "And?" Marlowe Elias Hale. Bachelor's in Accounting and Finance, top of your class 6 years ago. A father, Elias Hale, senior auditor at Vane Capital Holdings, terminated and criminally charged 5 years ago for an embezzlement scheme that cost investors $11 million. He died before the appeal was heard. You were denied your CPA license pending review of the same investigation, despite never being charged with anything yourself, and you have been serving food in this city for 6 years because no accounting firm in a 400-mile radius will return your calls. Cassia's voice stayed level through all of it, but something in her jaw had gone tight. Vane Capital, as in Delphine Ashworth Vane. The kitchen tilted slightly. I gripped the counter's edge. "You didn't know," I said. It wasn't a question, but she answered it like one. "I did not know," Cassia said, that the woman I ended my engagement to last night has the same last name as the company that destroyed your father's life 5 years before I ever met either of you. She looked at me with a stillness that had gone sharp at the edges. I don't believe in coincidence at that scale, Marlo, do you? I thought of the ledger still sitting in my apron pocket, folded now over the back of a chair in the guest suite, its taped spine and its 10 years of my father's small, exact handwriting, every account he'd ever touched, cross-referenced by hand, because he trusted his own memory over any system the firm gave him. No, I said slowly, I don't. Kasea's phone buzzed against the counter. She glanced at it, and whatever calm the morning had built cracked slightly at the seams. Delphine's father wants a meeting, she said. Today, he's calling it damage control before the merger signing Friday. $11 billion, Marlo, and a family who has spent 5 years letting the world believe your father was a thief. She stood, and something in her had gone very quiet and very dangerous, like weather deciding what shape to take. I think it's time I found out exactly what he stole, and from whom. I found the ledger that afternoon, and did not put it down again for 3 days. I'd read it 100 times in 5 years. Grief does that, makes you memorize a dead man's handwriting like scripture. But I had never read it the way I read it now, at Kassia's dining table with her company's actual audited filings from that year spread beside it, on a laptop Priya had quietly produced without being asked twice. My father's ledger wasn't a diary. It was a shadow set of books, the kind careful auditors kept when they suspected something and didn't yet trust the official record enough to write their suspicions anywhere official could find them. Column by column, his numbers didn't match Vane Capital's public filings from that year. Not everywhere. Only in 11 specific transfers, each one routed through a shell account with a name that meant nothing to me and everything. Apparently, to him, he'd underlined it 4 times, hard enough to tear the page. DAV Holdings, LLC, Delphine Ashworth Vane's initials. A company she'd formed 6 months before she turned 20, 3 years before my father was fired, 5 years before he died still insisting, to a courtroom that had stopped listening, that he'd found something and been silenced for it. He didn't embezzle it, I said, out loud, to an empty room, and my voice cracked on the last word in a way it hadn't in 5 years of saying the same sentence to people who didn't believe me. He found it. And he wrote it down instead of reporting it, because he was building a case, and he ran out of time. Marlo, I hadn't heard Kassia come in. She stood in the doorway with her tie loosened and her face unreadable, and when I looked up at her, I understood, with the clean, cold clarity of a column finally balancing, that the ground under both our lives had just shifted onto the exact same fault line. 11 transfers, I said. $11 million. My father's exact number. Every single one of them traces to a shell company Delphine built when she was 22 years old. I turned the ledger toward her, hands shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with grief. She didn't just ruin my father's career, Kassia. She used his own audit trail as the cover story. She let the firm believe he'd taken it. She let a courtroom believe it. She let me believe, for 5 years, that I inherited nothing from him but his name and a debt he never owed. Kassia crossed the room slowly and took the ledger from my hands with a care that felt like it was meant for me and not the object. She read the underlined page twice. When she looked up, the temperature in her eyes had changed entirely. Not the icy control of the boardroom, something colder and more personal underneath it. My mother, she said, was an Omega. My father married her for love, which the board considered a liability from the beginning. When I was 12, a rival family orchestrated a hostile campaign against her, smears, forged records, a scandal built entirely out of nothing, because destroying her was the fastest way to destabilize my father's hold on the company. She never recovered from it. She died believing the world had decided she was disposable the moment she was visibly loved. Cassia's voice didn't shake, but something underneath it had gone thin as wire. My father's answer was to teach me never to be loved visibly again. Control instead of connection. He called it survival. I called it that too, for 20 years. She set the ledger down between them like evidence at a trial neither of them had known they were building toward. The family that destroyed my mother was named Vane. The room went very quiet. They merged with the Ashworths 11 years ago, I said slowly, the pieces sliding together with a click I felt in my chest. Delphine's father built this whole arranged engagement to make peace between your family and his. He built it to finish a job he started 22 years ago, Cassia said, and I let him walk me into it because I thought love was the thing that got people destroyed. And control was the thing that kept them safe. She looked at me, and for the first time since the elevator, I watched the steel orchid's careful architecture come apart at the seams in front of a witness. I was wrong. I have been wrong for 22 years, Marlowe, and I did not understand how wrong until a woman with your father's exact handwriting in her apron pocket put her hand in mine in front of 200 people who expected me to let her go. I didn't have an answer for that. I didn't need one. My phone buzzed instead, Odette, then Priya's line, then Odette again. 3 messages arriving inside 40 seconds, and something about the rhythm of it made my stomach drop before I'd even read the words. Grant's telling everyone at the restaurant you stole tip money. Cops came by asking questions. Marlowe, call me now. I called Priya first. Her voice was flat and fast in a way that told me everything before the sentence finished. Delphine's people filed a police report an hour ago, Priya said. Theft and fraud, naming you specifically, citing your former manager as a witness. It's not real, Marlowe, but it doesn't have to be real. It has to hold until Friday's signing. She's not trying to convict you. She's trying to bury you in noise until the merger closes and the evidence stops mattering. I sat down hard on the edge of Kasaya's dining chair, the ledger still open between us, my hands gone cold. She's going to make me the villain, I said, using the exact story she already used on my father. Across the table, Kasaya's expression had gone somewhere I hadn't seen it go before, not cold. Lit. Terribly from underneath. Then we have 3 days, she said, to make sure the only story left standing is the true one. We didn't have 3 days. We had until Thursday night, because Thursday afternoon Delphine's lawyers filed an emergency injunction freezing me out of Thorn Tower entirely, citing an active criminal investigation and Cassia's obvious conflict of interest in harboring me. By 6 o'clock a car I hadn't ordered was idling at the service entrance, and by 6:15 2 officers who looked deeply unhappy about their assignment were standing in the lobby asking, with visible reluctance, whether I would come in voluntarily for questioning. Cassia met them at the elevator bank before they reached me. She's not going anywhere without counsel, Cassia said, and counsel is currently 3 floors up assembling a countersuit for defamation and evidence tampering that will name Delphine Ashworth Vane and her father personally. You're welcome to wait, ma'am. The injunction is court-ordered. The injunction, Cassia said, was granted this morning by a judge who received a $50,000 campaign contribution from Vane Capital 11 days ago. My legal team has already filed for recusal. Detective, I'd think very carefully about whose name goes on the paperwork for tonight. They left. Not happily. But they left. I found Cassia 20 minutes later on the observation floor, the one Priya had mentioned once in passing and I'd never worked up the nerve to ask about, a whole story given over to glass and a telescope the size of a small cannon, city lights spread out beneath it like something spilled and precious. I used to want this, I said, before I'd decided to say anything at all. When I was a kid, my dad used to take me up on our building's fire escape with a pair of $10 binoculars and tell me the names of stars he was mostly making up. I always wanted to see them through something real. Cassia didn't answer right away. She crossed to the telescope, adjusted something with the unhurried precision she brought to everything, and stepped back. "It's aimed at Cassiopeia," she said, "my mother's favorite. She used to say it looked like a woman thrown carelessly across the sky and still somehow arranging herself into something worth looking at twice." A pause, waited. Look, I looked. The stars came into focus sharp and close and almost unbearably clear, and something in my chest that had been clenched since the police cars broke open, quietly, without permission. "I'm scared," I admitted, still looking through the lens, because it was easier to say to stars than to her face. "Not of the charges. I know they're not real. I'm scared that even after we prove it, some part of the world will still look at me the way it looked at my father. Guilty by proximity. Guilty because it's easier than admitting the truth was in front of them the whole time and they didn't check." Marlowe. Her voice had gone very soft, closer now than I'd registered her moving. "Look at me." I straightened from the telescope. She was close enough that black pepper and storm-struck steel filled the whole small space between us. Close enough that I could see the exact place her control was fraying at the collar. "I am not asking you to trust the world," Cassia said. "I am asking whether you trust me enough for this." Her hand came up, not touching, just present, an offered thing and not a taken one. "Tell me to stop and I will. I need you to know that before anything else happens between us. Whatever this is, it doesn't move unless you want it to." My pulse was a drumline. Everything in 6 years of being furniture in other people's rooms had trained me to make myself smaller in moments like this, safer, unseen. I made myself not do it. "Don't stop," I said. Her hand found my jaw, careful over the fading bruise Delphine had left there 2 nights before, and when she kissed me, it was slow enough to be a question and certain enough to be an answer, and somewhere under the glass ceiling of that observation floor, with Cassiopeia arranged carelessly and perfectly above us, 6 years of invisibility finally, quietly, ended. We found the rest of it at 2 a.m, spread across the dining table like a crime scene rebuilt from paper. Cassia's forensic team had pulled Vane Capital's real transfer records under subpoena by midnight. My father's ledger gave us the map to read them by. 11 transfers 22 years ago into DAV Holdings had become, over 2 decades, 43 transfers into 6 shell companies, each one bleeding investor funds and merger escrow accounts into Delphine's personal reach, each one hidden behind the same fake paper trail she'd once pinned on a dead man, because he'd noticed 4 cents didn't add up and hadn't known when to stop noticing. "She's been doing this her entire adult life," I said, hoarse with hours and coffee. "The engagement to you wasn't peace, it was cover. $11 billion of merged assets and access to move through your books the same way she moved through my father's." Cassia's face across the table had gone somewhere flat and final. "Friday," she said. "The signing is Friday night, in front of every major shareholder and half the financial press in this city. She's going to try to close the merger and disappear the fraud into it before anyone thinks to look." She met my eyes, and for the first time all night, something like fierce relief moved under the exhaustion. We're going to let her walk into that room, believing she's already won. And then, Kasaya said, you're going to be the one who tells 200 witnesses exactly how the numbers actually add up. It's your father's case, Marlo. It should be your voice that closes it. The gown Priya's team sent up Friday afternoon was the color of the ivory Delphine had worn the night of the slap, and I understood the choice the second I saw it in the mirror. Not mockery. Correction. 6 years I had stood at the edge of rooms like this, one holding other people's glasses. Tonight, I would stand in the center of one holding the truth instead. Grant Feld was there when I arrived, working the same catering contract he'd threatened to have me arrested under 3 days earlier, and the look on his face when I walked past him in silk instead of a uniform was almost worth the 500 nights he'd docked my pay for being 4 minutes late to a shift he'd scheduled wrong on purpose. Almost, Priya's forensic pull had also, quietly, turned up 11 months of skimmed tip pools with his name on the transfer logs, a smaller theft riding the coattails of the enormous one, and she handed the file to hotel security with a look that promised he would not finish his shift employed. Delphine found me at the edge of the ballroom floor at 8:40, 20 minutes before the signing, dressed for a triumph she did not yet know she wasn't having. "You look ridiculous," she said, low, pleasant, the venom perfectly hidden under a smile for anyone watching from 6 feet away, playing dress up in a dead man's daughter's grief. "Cassia will tire of you the way she tires of everything sentimental. It's practically genetic." "You're wrong about that," I said, "but you're also, more urgently, wrong about the numbers." Her smile didn't move. Her eyes did. "I don't know what you think you found in a dead man's fantasies," she said, "but whatever fairy tale you've been telling yourself in Cassia's guest bed, it ends the moment this merger closes. Nobody will care what a fired waitress claims after that." 43 transfers, I said. 11 of them are still in my father's handwriting, cross-referenced to Vane Capital's real filings, the ones your father's people never thought to check because they assumed a junior auditor's shadow ledger died with him. The other 32 happened after his death, Delphine, which means you kept doing it. For 11 more years. Straight through tonight's merger escrow, for 1 second, the mask went all the way down, and underneath it I saw something ugly and frightened and entirely unsurprised. The face of a woman who had built her whole adult life on a bet that no one would ever check the math twice. "You have no proof anyone in that room will believe," she said. "I have proof," I said, "and I have the one thing you never accounted for. I'm the girl who counts everything. You called me that once to your friends the week I started at Meridian, the invisible girl who counts. You meant it as an insult." I felt Cassia arrive at my shoulder before I saw her, felt the whole temperature of the space shift around her presence like weather turning. "You were right. I do count everything. I've been counting since I was 22 years old, and they took my father's name away from him in a courtroom that never asked me for my math." The signing table was set at the center of the ballroom, under lights bright enough for the financial press cameras already rolling. Delphine's father stood beside it in a tailored suit that had, 22 years ago, apparently been worth more than a man's whole life. Cassia crossed to the microphone meant for closing remarks and did not wait to be introduced. "Before any signatures happened tonight," she said, and the room's noise folded instantly into silence the way it had 4 nights earlier, in a different ballroom, over a different kind of violence. "I'd like everyone here to hear from someone whose father worked for this firm before it destroyed him." I walked to the microphone with my father's ledger in both hands, its taped spine catching the light, and I did not shake. "My name is Marlo Hale," I said. 5 years ago, my father was fired from Vane Capital Holdings and charged with embezzling $11 million. He died before his appeal was heard, still insisting he was innocent. Tonight, I can prove he was. I read the numbers, all of them, in order, the way he'd taught me to read a column, patiently, exactly, refusing to skip a single line even when the room around me had gone rigid with recognition and dawning horror. I read the 11 original transfers and the 32 that followed, the shell companies and the dates and the merger escrow account currently sitting open on the table 6 feet from Delphine's shaking hand. When I finished, the silence in that ballroom had a different texture than the silence 4 nights earlier had. That one had been shock. This one was verdict. "This is fabrication," Delphine said. "Too loud? Too fast." The crack in her voice audible now even from the back tables. "She's unstable. She's been living in Cassia's apartment for 4 days. This is a jealous woman's revenge fantasy." The forensic audit was conducted independently by Thorne Dynamics' compliance division and verified against Vane Capital's own subpoenaed banking records, Cassia said, calm and absolute, and beside her Priya Nandi stepped forward with a folder thick enough to end a career on impact. "In 15 years working for this company, I have never once seen fabricated evidence survive an independent subpoena." "Detective," she nodded toward the 2 officers who had, this time, come at her own invitation. "I believe you'll find everything you need in that folder to reopen a 5-year-old case and to open several new ones." Delphine's father moved first for the exit and did not make it 6 steps before hotel security closed around him. Delphine herself stood frozen at the signing table, ivory gown, empty escrow account, 200 witnesses, and the particular ruin of a woman who has spent her entire life believing no one was watching closely enough to check. "You slapped a waitress for spilling wine," Cassia said to her, quiet enough now that it carried only because the room had gone utterly still to hear it. "You should have worried more about who was doing your math." They let her out in handcuffs 11 minutes later, past tables of people who had applauded her entrance an hour before, and not one voice rose in her defense. I stood at the center of that ballroom in a gown, the color of the humiliation that had started this, and Cassia crossed the floor toward me the way she had 4 nights earlier, unhurried, certain, the whole weight of the room bending around her, without her having to ask it to. "I have wanted to do this since a diner on 9th Street, she said, low enough that it belonged only to us even with 200 people watching. "I am done being careful with what I want." She didn't ask permission with words this time. She didn't need to. 4 days had taught us both the shape of the question. She tilted her head, bearing the long line of her throat toward my scent gland in an old, unmistakable gesture, offering first, the alpha yielding the choice to the omega, exactly backward from every story I'd grown up hearing about claiming, and exactly right for the 2 of us. "Tell me to stop," Cassia said, "and I will stop, in front of all of them, and it will not change one thing about how I feel about you." "Don't stop," I said, for the 2nd time in 4 days, and this time I said it in front of witnesses. Her mouth found the curve of my neck, gentle before it was anything else, and when her teeth closed over the scent gland at my throat, the bite bloomed through my whole body like a struck bell, sharp and warm and permanent. And somewhere in the crowd I heard Odette burst into tears and Priya Nandi say, to no one in particular, in the driest voice I had ever heard deployed for a moment this enormous, 15 years. "I told you, 15 years, and she's never once waited for anyone." The bond settled into place like a held breath, finally released. I felt her relief arrive inside my own chest a half-second after I felt mine, twin currents meeting in the same narrow channel, and understood for the first time what people meant when they said a bond was a second pulse. "Everyone," Cassia said, straightening, one hand still resting warm against the mark at my throat, her voice pitched to carry across the whole, shocked, silent, slowly applauding ballroom. "This is Marlowe Hale. She is not on my waitstaff. She is my mate. And starting Monday, she is also the newly reinstated head of forensic compliance for Thorne Dynamics, a position I imagine she is uniquely, extravagantly overqualified for." Somewhere near the back, Grant Feld was already being walked out by a second pair of security guards, a separate folder of skimmed tip pool records tucked under an officer's arm. He didn't look back. Nobody watched him go. For 6 years, I had been the invisible one in rooms exactly like this. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to watch someone else disappear from a room instead. 6 months later, on a cold, bright morning in October, I woke before Cassia did, which almost never happened anymore, and lay for a while just listening to the bond hum quiet and steady between us like a second, softer heartbeat. My father's ledger sat on the shelf across the room. No longer taped at the spine, Cassia had it rebound in dark leather the week after the trial, both our names pressed in small gold letters on the inside cover beneath his, for Elias, who counted first. Vane Capital had been dissolved within the month, its assets seized, its board disbanded. Delphine's father took a plea deal that would keep him behind walls for the next 11 years, one for each of the transfers he'd helped his daughter make disappear. Delphine herself was convicted on fraud and evidence-tampering charges that reopened, at last, my father's case and cleared his name in a single afternoon, 5 years and 4 months too late for him to hear it, but not too late for me to stand in that courtroom and say it out loud for both of us. My CPA license arrived by certified mail the following week, no letter of apology attached, which was, we agreed, exactly the kind of ending my father would have found funniest. Odette had a standing seat at our dinner table now and had appointed herself, without being asked, official ring-bearer for the bonding ceremony. Priya was still, 6 months later, threatening to organize whether we gave her permission or not. There was a box on the kitchen counter that morning that hadn't been there the night before. Small, plain, tied with string instead of ribbon, because Cassia had once mentioned, almost embarrassed, that she'd never learned to tie a proper bow. Inside it was a fig tart, still warm, made from a recipe Priya's staff had spent 4 months tracking down after I'd mentioned it once, half asleep, in the exhausted aftermath of the trial, my father's favorite. The one he used to make on Sunday mornings before everything broke. "You remembered," I said, when Cassia found me standing in the kitchen with it, throat tight. "I remember everything you tell me," Cassia said, coming to stand behind me, chin resting light against the mark at my shoulder. "It turns out that's what people mean by love. I spent 34 years thinking it was a liability. I was counting the wrong column." Later that morning, I made her climb the stairs to the observation floor before the light had fully burned off the city, both of us still in sleep clothes, both of us laughing at nothing in particular the way people do when they've finally run out of things to be afraid of. Cassiopeia had long since set below the skyline, but the telescope was still angled where she'd left it that first terrifying, transformative week, and when I looked through it now, I didn't see stars. I saw the whole gold-lit city spread out below us, 100,000 people going about their ordinary mornings, most of them invisible to each other the way I had once been invisible to all of them, and I thought, not for the first time, that the whole architecture of my life had rebalanced on a single decision, to put my hand in a stranger's, in a ruined dress, in a room where I'd expected to disappear. Cassia's arms came around me from behind, warm sugar meeting black pepper and rain struck steel in the cold morning air, and neither of us said anything for a long while. We didn't need to. Some columns, once they finally balance, don't need checking twice. The world spends a great deal of time deciding who is worth noticing, and it is very often wrong. The people who go overlooked, the ones who refill water glasses, who carry a dead man's handwriting folded in an apron pocket, who learn to make themselves small because small has always been safer, are, more often than anyone admits, the ones who were counting the whole time, quietly, exactly, waiting for someone to finally check their math. I was one of them. I am no longer invisible to anyone, least of all myself. The end. If a story about being finally, fully seen after years of being overlooked meant something to you tonight, that's exactly the kind of story this channel is built around. So take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to know in the comments, what's the moment you'd have wanted someone to stand up for you the way Cassia stood up for Marlo? Tell me which line hit hardest, and I'll be reading every answer. Until next time, keep believing that somebody, somewhere, is quietly counting the ways you deserve to be chosen. I'll see you in the next story.